We are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
If we do not renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
And looking ahead to what is next.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?
Welcome, everyone. I'm Carlo Martuscelli, Politico's European economy reporter, and you're watching Politico Live, the onstage extension of our nonpartisan journalism. Tonight, we discuss the big question for Europe's future. How can the EU tackle the growing number of crises that confront the continent, from climate to strategic autonomy and defense, while still delivering economic growth? In just a few weeks, the global landscape has shifted dramatically. We've seen the White House threaten to completely overturn the foundations of the transatlantic alliance. There's talk of across-the-board tariffs and a dramatic change in America's security posture, particularly with respect to the war in Ukraine. For Europe, that means urgent decisions about its industrial base and strategic autonomy. Meanwhile, the US administration's stance towards climate makes it even more urgent for Europe to meet its green commitments. So today we ask, can the EU respond to its growing challenges from defense to climate while still delivering growth? What policies, investments, and trade-offs will make the difference between an economic resurgence and slow decline? We have a fascinating fishbowl panel coming up in a few minutes. But before we dive in, I wanted to give a big thank you to Bayer for making today's events possible, and to all of you, both here in the room and those who are tuning in online. At Politico, we like to make these discussions interactive. So you can join the debate by tweeting @LivePolitico and sending your questions via Slido using the hashtag EmpoweringEUGrowth. To my side, you'll find a QR code that you can scan to join the conversation. And for our friends online, there's also a QR code on screen. As always, questions where you give your name and organization will get priority. We want to hear from you right away. So please take a moment to answer the poll presented by Bayer. And the poll reads, the EU Commission has put forward the competitiveness compass defining priority actions to foster Europe's competitiveness. Where, in your view, should it point? We'll take a look at the results at the end of the discussion. But before we do that, let's hear from Matthias Berninger, EVP Public Affairs, Sustainability and Safety at Bayer.
Yeah, good evening from my side as well. Carlo, thanks for the introduction. And we are also really happy and proud to be partnering with Politico in making these conversations happen. I remember more than 9 months ago, we had a very interesting session the day after the European elections. Shortly after the elections in the United States, we came together in a very first conversation about how will the relationship between the US and Europe change, what will that mean for the world? And now we are talking about how the Commission is doing about 100 days in. And I have to say that I'm very happy because throughout these debates, I was hoping that there will be a policy shift moving away from sticks in the direction of carrots. That is a signal that I took away from the newly formed Commission, that European competitiveness will be much more driven by the use of carrots than the use of sticks. I feel that Europe is moving in a good direction. In part, we are forced to because globalization as we know it is over. the relationship to the United States will be defined in different ways. I do believe current talks in China, in the aftermath also of the China Development Forum and the meeting of the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party will clearly be an interesting topic. And those of you who observe the implosion of aid, both in Europe as well as in the United States, will realize that our relationship to the global South, and in particularly to the countries in Africa, will change quite a bit. I'm also very happy that the Commission did not move away from their overall target of decarbonization. I personally think there is no alternative to it. And when you talk to farmers around the world, they will tell you that climate change is real. Bayer is a company that works in the health space as well. We are very, very knowledgeable in the cardiovascular space. When you talk to people suffering from extreme heat, they will also tell you, given how extreme heat is burdening our cardiovascular system, that there is no way into a different direction. So from that vantage point, happy that the Commission sticks to the plan to decarbonize Europe, but I'm even more happy that the way to go there has changed, that we are working on reducing reporting burdens, regulatory burdens, and that we are trying to incentivize as much as possible, i.e. focusing more on carrots than on sticks. As Europe is currently facing quite a difficult trade conflict with the United States, in a week from now we will know more about it, and I hope that all sides, both on the US side as well as on the European side, will come to a much more measured approach than what some fear. But as we are facing these trade conflicts, let's not forget that the European Union is #1 trade partner to many more countries than the United States. China has been overtaking us in recent years, but there are still a lot of countries in the world who see Europe as their #1 trade partner. So Europe should show up as a partner there as well. I think the Draghi report gives us ample of opportunity to reform the European Union. A lot has been talked about. What's now important between the EU Commission's proposals, the Parliament's very strong desire to weigh in, and the EU Council is that we really drive decisions that welcome innovation, that also loosen some of the burdensome regulations so much being talked about, and last but not least, that electrifies the European agenda. One of the metrics I look at, and it's one key metric to transform the chemicals industry, for example, is the growth of electricity use in the European Union. And in closing, my hope is that we can measure the success of this Commission and of the Parliament and of the Council in their trilogue in increasing the amount of electricity that we can produce in a green way to really fuel the transition of European industry and to drive our competitiveness. With that, I wish you a great discussion, and I hope for many more of these.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your intervention, Matthias. We're going to be covering all those points you mentioned in the discussion, including carrots and sticks and the role of China and also Europe's role with regards to the rest of the world. But before we dive into that, I'd like to welcome our guests who are joining us today. So we have Janeta Wegener, Deputy Head of Cabinet for European Economy Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis. Thank you, Janeta. We have Pavel Karbovnik, Undersecretary of State in the Ministry of Finance, Poland. Thank you, Pavel. Giacomo Filibek, Secretary General, Party of European Socialists. And we have Marcus Jan Beirer, Director General at Business Europe. Marcus, if you want to take the stage. And later we'll be joined by our fishbowl panelist, Maria Demartzis, Chief Economist and Center Leader, ESF Center at the Conference Board Europe, to shake things up with a fresh perspective. I encourage all the panelists, to respond to each other. I mean, I have a list of questions here, but I really like it when we have a dynamic discussion. So if you have something to say, don't wait for me to call on you. You can just jump in and respond to each other. My first question is for you, Janetta. The Berlaymont is embarking on an ambitious industrial strategy to push the envelope on technological innovation while consolidating its manufacturing base. At the same time, the EU's budget is notoriously constrained. So how do you view the problem of financing the EU's economic agenda?
Well, first of all, I think that it is very important to send a signal of clarity of purpose. And I think that this new European Commission has been very clear about two priorities. One is boosting competitiveness of Europe, and the second is defense, so meaning boosting defense capabilities and defense industry. And there I see that there is no one silver bullet or no money that can buy it. You know, it's not like on the market and I just buy competitiveness. No, this is not how it works. There are many factors that we will be discussing probably today, such as energy price, such as regulatory environment in Europe, and of course level playing field on our export markets. There's a question of talent, attracting talent and skills. So this competitiveness obviously is a very complex endeavor to achieve. And then at the same time, I would like to look at this from a perspective where these two priorities, competitiveness and defense, are definitely interlinked. And it's true that as previous speakers said, US administration is currently kind of revising its defense commitments to Europe, or sending these signals that foster unpredictability. But I also would like to emphasize that this is time where Europe actually has many opportunities. And this is maybe how I would like to reflect about this time. First, we have an opportunity to, let's say this, by installing these high levels of uncertainty that US administration is actually giving the EU a strategic focus. And I think that this is actually a huge opportunity for us to get or to act together, be it on competitiveness or defense. And maybe later I could expand how I see these two are interlinked.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just a quick follow-up question before we move to the next panelist, which is, you know, you mentioned that the US is, in a certain sense, opening up the field to Europe to act by putting so much pressure on the bloc. One of the ideas that's now being discussed, and it seems like with wide agreement, is the emission of more EU joint debt for military expenditures under the form of EU joint borrowing. You know, we were mentioning financing before, and there's no silver bullet, as you said, but do you think there's a role for EU debt in the future? Also because, you know, in the Draghi report, one of the recommendations is the creation of a European safe asset. You know, maybe European common bonds could play that role, increasingly so in the future.
Well, I think that the Commission has already proposed a very ambitious package that is called REARM /Readiness 2030. And by the way, like defense component of it is only one component. There is also, of course, preparedness strategy that the Commission has also unveiled today. So, of course, we are seeing that in Europe you have member states such as Poland that are spending already very much on defense. We also see Germany stepping up the game. And then there are other member states that still should do more effort. And this is precisely why we proposed flexibility for defense spending within existing EU fiscal rules. And then there is also SAFE instrument that offers another 150 billion euros for joint procurement. So for me, very important point is not only spending more, but also spending better together.
Okay, great. You mentioned the high levels of defense spending undertaken by Poland, so that provides me a very natural segue to you, Pavel. So
It's true.
And Poland has its own ideas, actually, of how to finance defense spending. You know, I know that Poland has backed a proposal to create a rearmament bank, for example. So if this project goes ahead, and maybe you can tell me if you think it is likely to go ahead, do you think it should be open to US involvement as well?
Thank you. Thank you for this question and for the invitation. If I may start by agreeing with Żaneta, because actually she stole my line. I also think that what we need is a clarity and focus, and the fact that the US is somehow different these days, to put it diplomatically. We certainly know what should be this focus, and here competitiveness and defense are the two most important objectives that we've been pushing forward for almost a year, and we are very happy that it's now on the top of the EU and also above all of the European Commission. So we are working hand in hand with the Commission to make sure that indeed competitiveness, which means basically I know I shouldn't say, especially in the presence of the socialist group, deregulation. So I will say, above all, simplification.
Nomina non sunt substantia. If your aim is deregulation in the end, but we'll talk about it.
No, it's much more sophisticated. But first and foremost, simplification and getting rid of overburdening of the companies. And here I think your question about financing and innovation links very well, because if you analyze the data, there is no lack of public funding for innovation. There is a lack on the level firms compared to the US, for example. So this is something that we have already identified, and this exactly has to do with the regulatory burden. So if we decrease the regulatory burden by simplifying what is already in place, not lowering the standards, obviously, because that's not the objective, then we'll be easily arriving at, opportunities, financing opportunities for firms to invest much more in innovation and defense. And here, the new defense focus and hundreds of billions of euros, actually, that will go into defense are very handy, because we shouldn't forget that also the innovation track in the US was partly financed by the defense investments from DARPA and from the US government. Even the infamous Elon Musk is using still government funding to bring innovation to the market. So I think this all very well links, and now we have, as Żaneta mentioned, we have a very clear focus, and we have a massive tool provided by the Commission in the form of 150 billion of loans, which are very favorable loans that you cannot have on the market, because the repayment is deferred by 10 years, then you're repaying until 2070, so probably your grandchildren may still pay a chip into it. But joking aside, this is a massive boost that will go directly into our industry, and we are all talking about regaining competitiveness, getting autonomy, and creating jobs. So I think this is. I see.
But what about the rearmament bank?
I was trying to avoid this question. No, but let's be serious. I mean, what the Commission has proposed so far, I think is at the moment is the most important chunk, because this provides an immediate solution to our immediate needs. But obviously, in the medium to long term, this is not enough. Because we already know, for example, I can give you an example of Poland. We're going to issue around 200 billion of euros to finance our rearmament. The Germans are going to issue 400 billion of euros, so it's already 600. If you add the Brits and the Nordics, and maybe those others who would like to increase defense spending, we are talking about trillions of investments in the next couple of years. So we have to find the money somewhere. Obviously, for the moment, we finance it via our own budget. But the question is, if all the governments will be spending hundreds of billions of euros, does it make sense to do it separately? And I don't think it makes much sense, because first and foremost, you do not achieve the effect of scale. So what we are talking about in the first instance, it's not yet a bank or whatever vehicle you might need, but first we have to have a very well-defined concept how it would be possible to aggregate demand at the central level. And I think we are not there yet intellectually.
Okay, so maybe US is TBD then on the rearmament bank. Giacomo.
But if I may, one sentence on the US, because you actually started, and I just came back from Washington yesterday, and it's very interesting because we love to self-bash ourselves, and the EU is so poor, etc. We're so bad. But it's very interesting because it was in Washington where I heard the abbreviations EDIP, rearm, SAFE. Are we going to be able to join you guys in this big endeavor? Because we would like to, but somehow we can't. So, I think this is a very interesting discussion ahead of us.
Excuse me. Giacomo, we've been speaking a lot about defense. Today, the UK's Labour Party government, which is a member of the Party of European Socialists, announced a combination of welfare cuts and increased military spending. So my question to you is, are Europeans going to have to get used to the idea that their security is going to have to come at the expense of their living standards, and that this is going to happen under center-left governments as well?
No, I don't think we should get used with this idea. I'm not going to enter now and comment what the Labour government is doing today in UK, but I want to take a principled stance here. We definitely understand, as you all do, the new reality in which we are. We know that our strategic autonomy depends on the choices that we make. When it was COVID times, we understood that strategic autonomy was getting medicines on our own. When it is now Trump administration coming in, we understand that strategic autonomy is taking care of our own defense. And we take it that this is a full priority. But we need to remind ourselves that whatever project, whatever endeavor the European Union embarks itself into, the democratic dimension of its consequences is crucial. And when I say the democratic dimension, I mean the support of our people, the support of our citizens. Now, if you start telling our citizens, look, we need to increase defense spending, and this will come at the cost of your welfare state, I'm afraid that we're going to lose the battle down the line. So this is seriously a risky path to take.
Okay, but then what about climate? I mean, Germany is about to embark on a massive infrastructure and rearmament program, but only a small fraction of that spending is going to go into investment into climate goals. And that was won through a hard-fought battle with the Greens. They had to be essentially, this had to be promised to them for Merz to gain the necessary votes. So do you think the environment risks becoming a victim of this new geopolitical situation we're in?
I would like to remind ourselves of one thing. We are in this new reality. We are under threat, internally and externally. We need to step up our game. The new coalition government of SPD, CDU, CSU has shown already in the very first weeks of negotiations that once you get rid of people like Lindner, then you are able to have good deals for Germany and maybe also for Europe. But January 2025 has been the hottest month globally since we start recording temperatures. Climate change, global warming, didn't stop because Russia invaded Ukraine, because we had COVID, or because Trump won the elections. So let's remind ourselves that the two things can still go hand in hand. security is not only about buying weapons or producing them, manufacturing them, selling them to ourselves. We are all in favor of producing in Europe and buying in Europe, so don't misunderstand me on that. But security is also about defending the conquest that we have achieved in the past years in the legislation for the Green Deal, because they are going to secure the future of our society and the sustainability of our planet, our life on this planet. I think it's fundamental that we do not put the two things in competition, because then we all lose.
Markus, I wanted to go over to you next. You know, among Europe's many, many problems, and we've discussed the security situation, we've discussed the climate, strategic autonomy, trade, et cetera, there's also Europe's, let's say, somewhat sluggish economic growth. And the way I see it is that businesses in Europe face three major pain points, at least. This is what I understand businesses themselves saying, which is regulations, financing, capital markets, and energy prices. First of all, do you agree with that? Is there anything you'd like to add to that? And how do you rate the Commission's efforts so far to tackle these pain points?
Well, I mean, first, thanks for inviting me, and it was a pleasure listening, and thanks for the questions. Well, I mean, first, I think we need to, and we all understand that we are in a situation where business as usual will not do the trick. There's a lot of new tasks. We need to become stronger, but I think the starting point needs to be that we all understand that Europe can only be as strong as its economy. And this is something we have not been successful in the last couple of years, because if you look at the mere figures, and you can take whatever figure you want, growth is sluggish, investment is leaving Europe at a high speed, industrial employment has been going down rapidly. We lag behind our major competitors in productivity development. So there's many, you can take whatever angle you want, and we have simply not been good enough. And the truth is, and I mean, this was even before, I mean, how did you say, Pavel, before the US started to be a bit different? I mean, there was this saying, I mean, why does the US and China take Europe seriously? Well, the answer was the strong market and the strong economy. So for Europe, more than any other place in the world, we are only as strong as our economy. So now, as we need to come up with many new tasks, I mean, to do what we are asking for since ages, to become more competitive, now we need to do it under fire, more difficult, but sometimes Europe is doing best in crisis, so let's hope that this will also work this time. You mentioned it, I mean, enormous efforts that what we call the peace dividend, and we all grew up with this, and it was a very nice thought. But of course, at some moment, we woke up and saying, okay, the parabellum, meaning if you want the peace, you need to be prepared to also counter those who are maybe less peaceful in their thinking. So for all this, we will need to have a functioning economy, which we didn't have. So we are, of course, constantly asking our members, and the message is not new, but I think now it is higher on the list, what is necessary to do better? Why are you not investing in Europe? And the answer is what you are saying. So we have regulatory overregulation in Europe. Our companies tell us they're drowning in regulation. We have a cost of energy gap to our major competitors, which is unsustainable. It's a standalone reason for many companies not to invest in Europe. We have the access to finance problem, of course. This is something which hinders our companies to grow. This is why we see many good companies scaling on the other side of the pond, which of course we need to repair. And I would add, for Europe, it's more important than any other place in the world that we keep the world as our market. Of course, economic security is important. Of course, but at the same time, we are 6% or something of the world population. More than 90% of the growth will happen outside Europe. So it's simply true that more than many other parts of the world, we will need our access to world markets for imports, strategic materials, and for exports. And we will urgently need an ambitious diversification agenda to also do the trick here.
And how do you rate the Commission's efforts so far?
Well, how do I rate it? I think it's I mean, first, it's very important that, I mean, if you look at the new Commission, let's say, spirit and goals, it's very important that this is well understood, that we need to get the competitiveness angle right, because that's the beginning of everything. So that's very positive. Second, there's also positive first steps. I would say mostly the Omnibus 1 proposal is proving that there is the readiness to act tangibly. I mean, of course, we also welcomed, I mean, the competitiveness compass, even so it's a strategy, but I always defended it because, I mean, I always say a ship that doesn't know to which harbor it wants to sail, there's never positive wind, so that's good. Also, the Clean Industrial Deal has a lot of good aspects, even so it does not yet give a concrete answer to how do we really get the cost of energy down in the short term. So this we will still need to work. I'm out there a lot. I mean, I've been, I think, in 13 capitals talking to our key members in the last 3 weeks. And I can tell you it's a hard sell. Because out there, I mean, for the companies, I mean, as much as we say the things are going to the right directions, the right thing, and we very much appreciate this. I mean, Sanetta, you know this is highly appreciated. And we are, I mean, we had a debate in council, Tripartite Social Summit with the presidents, we acknowledge this. But out there for the companies who are under pressure and where there's reasons why they're under pressure, strategies don't do the trick. I mean, they really need to see rapid consequences on the ground. This is why it's so important that we deliver rapidly on certain things, and this is why I would say the first step, which was done today in Council, so that the stop the clock on the Omnibus 1 package has been successfully brought through Council, and I would say congratulate the Polish presidency for the action here. I mean, that's the kind of things we need, more of them, more rapidly, and very decisively.
So I do actually want to talk about simplification now. You know, we've discussed the omnibus package. I was curious, the US is looking to simplify as well with Elon Musk's Doge department. So I did want to know, are you looking at all at what Doge is doing, you know, for better or for worse?
We talk about smart simplification.
I don't take any judgment. You know, I'm a journalist, nonpartisan, so.
Well, first of all, I think that Markus is right that the main message here is that we are serious about simplification. And this is why first Omnibus will be followed by Omnibus 2, Omnibus 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., etc. So this is exactly the signals that we want to send to companies, that we will scrutinize these laws, be them sectorial or be them horizontal, and we will look for these very concrete deliverables to make life of companies easier. Because I agree with what Giacomo said. Of course, climate change is still a major challenge, and we are not giving up on our decarbonization goals. But what is very important is the question, what exactly do we want to cut? Probably we want to cut emissions and not the number of companies in Europe, you know? So this is the fundamental question, how we can get to cutting emissions in a less painful way for our companies. Plus, we know that 99% of European companies are small and medium-sized enterprises. These are companies that give jobs in our regions, far away from capitals, yeah? That they are our social and economic tissue. So what we have to see is that our SMEs are not simply forced to close down businesses because they cannot comply with regulatory or reporting environments. And let me give just one very concrete example. Now in this omnibus package, we proposed immediate relief to almost 200,000 importers under CBAM. So these companies, almost 200,000 companies exempted, they represent only 1% of emissions. You know, 1% of emissions and so many companies relieved. So we have to do indeed this emission cutting, but in a way that our social economic tissue is not suffering. But indeed, a very strong signal from the Commission side that we would like to do it. We continue this work over 5 years, next 5 years to come. So this was not a one-off, and I think that this is the commitment that we have taken and we will carry through with.
Okay. Can I say one sentence? Because I mean, it was raised by Giacomo, and I agree, and was raised by Sanetta. I mean, I can very clearly say the business community is not questioning the goals. We have stood behind the goals of climate neutrality by mid-century, and we continue to do so. At the same time, we are at the rescue mission. I mean, what I call what we are doing here now is a double-sense rescue mission. A rescue mission for the business location, because I mean, Sanetta is right. I mean, if we reach the goals by deindustrializing Europe, I mean, this will not work for nobody. And second, on a rescue mission also for the goals, because if nobody invests in Europe, and if the investments are not happening in the sectors where you need to do the transition, I mean, the goals, you can put them on a piece of paper, they will never happen. So it's really about doing the thing in a smarter way, and more driven by facts, less driven by ideology.
Giacomo, we've been talking about simplification. I mean, do you agree with what's been said so far, or is this a kind of undercover way to ditch the Green Deal?
Let's not fall into caricature of each other's position. I don't think that the socialist family wants to cut enterprises or small and medium enterprises or businesses. This is definitely not our aim. Our aim, in fact, is to support small and medium businesses in Europe to thrive with the Green Deal objective in mind. I'm very relieved that you said it, because I was going to ask it. Do we all agree in the room that 2050 is the goal?
No doubt about this.
Decarbonization, climate neutrality. We are all on board of this. Fine. Then the conversation continues. How to do it? How to achieve it? How to make sure that what the Green Deal paved in some way is going to be instrumental to growth, is going to be instrumental to creating good quality jobs, is going to be instrumental to reindustrialize the European Union. Now everyone is thinking of, okay, we don't do cars anymore, but we do tanks because we are rearming. This is, again, a caricature. We don't want to do this. That's not the point. But there is defense, there is digital, and there is climate policies that help us to rethink the way our industry at the European Union level should foster, improve, and create new conditions for investments, new conditions for creating skilled and quality jobs. Now, when it comes to investments, we have been seeing this. I think it was in the Letta report itself, 300 billions of private wealth is not invested in the European Union. We need a capital market union. We need to have the possibility to create the environment for our economy to be supported by our own wealth, by our own money. This is part of the strategic autonomy thinking. If we continue to put in competition economic growth with the Green Deal objectives, again, we are not making a good service neither to the first one nor to the second. And again, we polarize the society with populist parties that just enjoy this kind of conversation because they enjoy to go and campaign against those stupid Brussels rules about Green Deals. They enjoy brutalizing these conversations. They enjoy painting these elitists that want you to drive electric car and electric bicycles while blah, blah, blah. No, we don't do a good service to what are the aims of this great project, which is the European Union. And at the same time, we have also to stop self-flagellating ourselves. I hear also at the beginning of the conversation that the big question, is the European Union in decline?
Stagnation, maybe not decline, but stagnation.
Look at the manufacturing industry, and let's look at some numbers. we produce 60% more cars than the US. We have twice as much as passenger planes productions. We employ 33 million workers in the manufacturing industry, the US 11. I'm not saying that our industries are not struggling, but all industries in the world are struggling post-COVID, post-pandemic, in this new post-globalization system that is opening up with tariffs and barriers and so on. Which means that we have a good base to start from, because we do have a vibrant base to start from. Now it's a question of embarking ourselves into the real New Deal, if you want. You can call it clean industrial deal because you don't like anymore the Green Deal label. As I said before to Pavel, nomina non sunt substantia rerum when it comes to European business. Because if you play with words and you say simplification, but you mean deregulation, then we don't follow you, regardless of how you label it. You see what I'm trying to say here?
Pavel, I wanted to go over to you. I mean, we've discussing climate, and energy is a big part of that. It's one of the issues that industry has flagged, high energy prices. So at the same time, we also have this issue of decarbonization that we're pursuing in parallel, high energy prices, decarbonization. Coal accounted for nearly 60% of Poland's energy use in 2024. And I'm just taking Poland as an example. So what's more important right now, pursuing energy independence or meeting climate targets? And I know you're going to say both, but
how do you know? No, thank you. But before going to the Green Deal and the coal issue, let me maybe start with the regulation simplification. I mean, in Poland, I think that it's also because you've mentioned. Giacomo, the democracy and the public support is the most important. And I think it's also important to distinguish the difference in national debates. And for example, in Poland, when we are talking about simplification, people use the word deregulation. That's why I've mentioned it.
Okay.
So it's very important that, we are still 27 countries stretched from Lisbon to Riga and Tallinn. So I think we should, be mindful of this, that this is a very complex discussion in Brussels, but it gets even more complex if you go national. And, frankly speaking, because you've made this comparison with Dodge, I think, we should praise the Lord every day that we have Valdis Dombrovskis, who is responsible for simplification, who is meticulously looking into what can be simplified in a way that will not disrupt business operations and not some other figures. Because what really matters, and I think Żaneta also mentioned it at the beginning, is the stability, that we need to have a stable business and regulatory environment. And we already see it with the reactions of the stock exchange in the US, that, if you have a bit of chaotic policy, to put it mildly, then the market reacts immediately. And, one of our advantages is that we have a very stable system. Obviously, it means that there will be no revolution, but it also means that, the businesses can be more or less sure that when the change comes, it comes with a certain, knowledge and thought. So, again, praise the Lord, Valdis. Second, on the Green Deal call, and, I think, again, I think it's very important to exactly remember that January was the hottest month ever recorded. This is, this is because we are now like, so let's, invest in defense, we have Trump, we are focusing on other issues. January. I mean, guys, this is crazy, this is happening. And our kids, our grandchildren, and kids are scared, And we need security, we need a very thoughtful policy to achieve the goals of 2050 of the decarbonization, because it's the most fundamental issue also for our democracy and for the credibility of our democratic system, for the legitimacy, if I may say so. Having said that, of course, you know, we have to be smart about it. And here I would plead to Giacomo that, you know, I don't want you to defend the legislation. I want you to defend the goals, because, you know, the legislation is such. I just give you one or two examples. That you know, we all want electric cars because they are cleaner. Obviously, if you live in the city, it's nicer if you go jogging. You know, if you take your kids to school, obviously, if everybody had an electric car, it would be much more healthy. But the problem is that not everybody can afford it. That's the first point. The second point is that we do not have the infrastructure. So the current norms that were adopted by the European Commission, which has been a little bit appended recently by the Commission mindful of the reality, is that we have around 800,000 chargers in Europe, whereas, you know, these goals were set for 2 million chargers. So we have to look into the Green Deal and see, you know, which part doesn't match the reality, because the Green Deal was adopted a few years back. So it doesn't mean that we need to get rid of it. Quite the contrary, we have to make it better. We have to see how to recalibrate the Green Deal so that there is this democratic legitimacy for our policies. Because I'm sorry, but if you are thinking, for example, about ETS2, in my country, again, I just give you a national perspective, there is already an app used by the right-wing radicals, and people are scared about the prices that the ETS2 will bring on them, because it's about, you know, people are basically putting what are the square meters of your flat, what's your car, and the app tells you how much it will cost you, because you will have to, you know, adjust your payments for the flat, for the cars, for everything. So it costs money, lots of money, and people don't have this money. So I'm sorry, we have to recalibrate, and I hope that the socialist group fully understands this, because this is exactly about the legitimacy and the cost for the regular citizens. And also in Italy, I know that there is this fear that you will have to insulate your house because there are higher targets, but how do you get the money for that? So it's a real question for the people. And if you ask me about coal, you know, the first ECOFIN, we have put energy prices as a top priority for our presidency. We've commissioned a report from the IMF, also to have a different perspective than the European Commission, to sort of nudge the European Commission to change its thinking, to motivate for a bigger change. And the outcome of these discussions also among the ministers, we had an informal dinner, was that everybody is for a deeper integration of the market. But we are not there yet, and I think, you know, here I would expect a much more ambitious approach from the Commission, including especially on the so-called capacity market, which is now national. So we have national perspective. We're all talking about single market, but we have national focus. We have too much national focus. And the Commission is there to tell us, guys, it doesn't make much sense, you know. And I see it from national perspective, because we were looking, since we came to government, we've been looking into these investments in the coal-fired power plants, because indeed we have to decarbonize, and we have to, at the same time, have the power if we want to attract investments. For example, in AI, which need lots of energy. And, you know, when I see how much we have to invest, it goes into the billions. We could invest much less if we had a common market, but we don't have that. So this could be one example.
Thanks. I just want to bring Maria up on the stage, because I'm worried that the time is, we're getting towards the end. So, Maria, could you take the stage for the fishbowl section of the panel? Oh.
I know.
That's exciting. I didn't know that was going to happen. Okay.
Additional
so,
spice.
Maria, the expectations are high. So, you know, one of my pet peeves in Brussels, and I think it's a product of the kind of consensus-based negotiating culture in the city, is that there's a tendency to paper over discussions of trade-offs. You know, we don't want to. We want to say that we can do everything. We can do energy. We can do defense, decarbonization, growth, simplification, all at the same time. So I wanted to ask you a very straightforward question, which is, do you think that the EU's push for decarbonization will act as a drag on growth?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I think this is the right question to ask, actually also following what we've heard, the trade-offs, and not just on decarbonization, but on everything.
And feel free to answer in general.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that is really the issue, that is the $1 million question, and also the one that all panelists have referred to, this issue of democratic legitimacy, and that is why I think it's the responsibility of politicians to inform what the trade-offs are and where we sit on those trade-offs. What are we going to do more of something, and by consequence, less something else? I think this is crucial. And I'll start with the very obvious thing, that if we were having this event 2 months ago, 3 months ago maybe, the discussion would have gone rather differently, I think. But here we are. We are in a world where change is forced on us, even if some of it is good, actually, but it's certainly forced on us at the speed that we might not be able to actually react. And this is the issue now. You know, there is no doubt that we have to spend now on defense. And actually, we've seen some really incredible tectonic movements coming from Germany on this issue, only as a result of defense being the emergency. Yeah? We haven't seen quite so many changes happening in Germany on the Green Deal. Yeah? And I think this is just a reflection. Maybe it's a reflection of human nature. We only really do the big things if we have a knife on our throat, not elsewhere. But the fact of the matter is we have to defend. We have to rearm. And we have to be more autonomous. This is a reality. And then there is, and here I want to sort of maybe push back a little bit into this idea that there isn't competition between objectives. I don't think this is honest. I think we need to understand that there is competition between objectives, and there is a timeline, and we have to make some choices. There is competition on the financing of things, right? There isn't an endless pie that we can just cut in different ways. There is a pie. Maybe it grows if we do more jointly. Maybe there are efficiencies to be had if we do things jointly, and I'm sure there are, both on the green issues and on the defense. But the fact of the matter is that pie is given. And we have to find out how we're going to divide it. I think it's absolutely essential that we understand that. And then, I mean, when it comes to the because it always comes down to financing. Before I say something on the financing, there is, of course, things that we can do on defense to coordinate, to do things better. There is things we can coordinate on the Green Deal that we can do better. We can build jointly infrastructure that's going to be seriously effective, both on the digital and on the physical infrastructure. Think about trains from the Letter report. But the fact of the matter is we need to finance all this. And how are we going to do that? A number of panelists talked about private money. The rate at which private money leaves the EU is about 2.5% of GDP, 400 billion actually. Draghi talked about 800 billion, which is 5% of GDP. Half of that, 2.5% of GDP leaves the EU and goes elsewhere. And at the same time, we have huge investment needs. Huge investment needs, and now with defense, even more investment needs. How are we going to convince private sector to bring that money back? How are we going to do it? Yeah? So that we can release some of these budget constraints that we have in order to do all the things that we have to do, and therefore push the trade-offs further out so that we have to deal with them. Yeah? And this is where I think the simplification narrative comes in. We've seen it also on the question that you asked originally. The first one that was, I don't know what the final results are, but at the beginning it was really simplification in the single market. This is what will bring businesses back to Europe, the European businesses back to Europe, and hopefully maybe other businesses as well. And when we talk about simplification, we mean simplification. We don't mean deregulation in the context of Europe. I mean, I think the DOGE comparison is very inappropriate. The DOGE is a...
It's reality, Maria, come on.
No, the comparison is inappropriate. What happens is, I think the DOGE I mean, you know, try and understand what's going on. I think on the DOGE thing, there's a policy of destruction, but without something to replace it. You destruct something, but what do you replace it with? What is really you aiming to do? That is not clear.
Travel to Mars.
Yeah, well, maybe that is maybe we all need to travel to Mars if we don't meet the green objectives. But the fact of the matter is that this isn't what's going on here. The DOGE comparison really is not an appropriate one in my view. It is really about what can we do on the single market. Start with the things that are, when we call it the easy things to do, meaning that they don't cost much. And there are many things that you can do that don't cost much, like in the regulation side, coordinate regulation. And simplify, of course. Bring the EIB in. I am very encouraged by the fact that the EIB has now put defense as its objectives. There is the dual-purpose technology that is also going to boost the research and development, which I think is actually a very good thing. Hopefully will come into the firms as well, so we can close the innovation gap that we had on the Draghi report. I also think that in the short term, this is probably an opportunity in terms of growth, even though on the whole, I would argue that in the long term we will get there. It is the short term that we have a problem with. I think we have to acknowledge also the fact that, yes, we can put our heads together, and in the long term we can do it, because, I don't know who said it, but we are a rich continent. We have the means. But it is the short term that is a little bit problematic, and this is actually what requires probably a different tack. It's not really about a strategy, it's about making do. Do we involve the US in the defense procurement? A question that has not been answered.
I tried.
but I think it is not an easy one. And in the context of an industrial policy, you have to think very carefully about that. Also because we need extra levers to negotiate with the US. We don't have many levers with the US in the current, so we need one of them. So you need to think about these things. How do you improve the position you're in, which for the short term is not a very good one. So I'll stop here, and now maybe I'll take more questions.
Great. I mean, maybe I'll leave the floor now to the panelists if you want to answer. Maria, and maybe I'm also going to throw in a question from the audience from Arnaldo Abruzzini, who asks, a little dramatically, Lisbon strategy, Europe 2020 failures, exclamation point. Are we writing a new strategy that will fail as well? So I guess it's, looking at Europe's track record when it comes to the economy, or at least, these kind of policy documents and economic planning. Maybe it's fair to say it's not an amazing track record. I mean, very complicated problems, and Brussels has limited fiscal ability compared to government, so maybe it's understandable. But how can we avoid repeating the failures of the past as well? That would be my little addition. But I'm really opening up the floor to all the panelists to respond as you'd like. Marcus, I know you wanted to speak, yeah.
Well, I mean, there's other issues now, so I'll reply to the new issues. So, I mean, first, Lisbon strategy. I mean, I have been part of the team which has elaborated the Lisbon strategy, and I still think it was right. The problem is we didn't deliver. And there's reasons for this, because, I mean, there is always this, and the same issue goes in the single market and other things. I mean, you have always this fight, what is strategic for Europe, what is strategic for one or the other member states. So of course, I mean, there will always be member state interests, but we will need to become better and say, okay, what do we need to do together to leverage the project? And the Lisbon strategy, up to a certain extent, had some good levers, which dealt with the fact that there was maybe no competency on EU level. And meaning what was back then called the open method of coordination, so that you first ranked countries and then you named and shamed them. And so this was, let's say, the little teeth we could put into this without changing the treaties. The truth is, after a couple of years, and this worked up to a certain extent, after a couple of years the teeth were taken out because the member states didn't want to be named and shamed. Because, of course, it provided them pressure in their home markets and their political debates, which was precisely the goal. So what do we need to do? I mean, we need to be serious, and we need to also take the heat, and we need to take the pain. And that brings me to the democracy. I think we all agree with this, and we all. I mean, for me, COVID is an example that with all our flaws, I'm convinced that Europe dealt with the COVID better than the US did or China did. So it can work. But we need to eliminate, let's say, the inefficiencies in our system. And I mean, coming to, and I don't talk about democracy, but coming to the question of democracy, I mean, I think what Maria says is true. There's choices to be made. And I think that the recipe to not go in the direction of extremes is twofold. Number one, politicians need to tell people the truth. I mean, people are not stupid. I mean, you need to basically say there is trade-offs, there will be pain, there is choices to be made, you need to explain, number one. And number two, we need to solve the problems. Because to basically say, I mean, the project is so important and we need to do this and that, I mean, when I go out there, I mean, I can tell you it's a hard sell, everything we're doing here, and we're all in the same boat. I mean, Parliament, Council, Commission, business representatives, what have you. I mean, for many of the companies on the ground, we are the crazy people who produce the stuff which hinders them from doing their job. And we all know that's not true, but it means we need to do better and we need to do differently, and we need to prove to them that we can.
Giacomo, we're over time, so I'm going to ask you to a very brief response, and also Janetta, just because there's been some criticisms of the Commission. If you want, I'd also like to give you the right to respond as well, and then we'll close out the panel.
Try to be as synthetic as possible, but when talking about the pie, it is what it is, that we understand.
But we need to
it cannot be
enlarge it together.
But it cannot be, in fact, that it's always the same ones eating the pie. Yeah. And if we continue to play this game of politicians need to be responsible, they have to say the truth to the people, there are hard choices to be made, that can be translated easily into the most vulnerable will pay, those that usually eat the pie will keep eating the pie. This is not acceptable, because the choices that has to be made is exactly of the political leadership of this union. And the choice to be made is that the digital transition, the green transition, they have to be just transition. And they have to be instruments to create growth and to create jobs. And when there are problems, and there are problems, we also need to be able to answer concretely and not fall into the trap that radical right-wing populist movements are trying to prepare for us. You quote, Pavel, ETS2. Okay, it can be scary for some, but you can also answer that there is a social climate fund that is there.
But it's not enough.
But
it's not enough.
But then we need to give more money to this.
Exactly.
But we need to give more. So and that's the point. I'm happy that you agree.
Yeah, I agree.
But there will never be enough money if we don't get it right. I mean, that's the truth.
But and here we touch upon, and I'm sorry that it's really the end.
Yeah.
But if the pie is what it is, then we need to understand that bigger shoulders maybe have to make a more effort to support.
Okay. The organizers are going to murder me if I take any longer, but Janetta, I do want to give you the ability to make the last point. Just
well, for me, first point: what is the pie? Because if pie is only made of public money, then it's a very, very small pie. The pie has to be public money and private money. How do we attract private money, private investment, in addition to public money? I think very long-standing fundamentals must be fixed, deepening single market, just as Pavel explained for energy. This is something we can do at no cost or close to no cost. Capital markets, again, something more of political will rather than cost. Then investment in innovation, yes, there is a cost, but there is also like immediate return, not immediate return, mid to long-term return. And simplification, well, this is rather about attracting private money. We all established that it has to be a regulatory friendly environment for companies to operate here. And then I would like to make a last point. I don't think that choices always have to be made. Yes, choices sometimes have to be made, but here it would be also wrong to to put these things too separate in silos, yes? Just to give you one example, you talked about digital transition or technologies we need for the future, including decarbonization technologies, but let's take digital technologies like AI and quantum. So now the EU can be Ukraine's best partner and work with Ukraine on deep tech innovation that is stemming from this war. This war is very unfortunate, it's a great tragedy on Ukraine, but we have the biggest warfare laboratory next to our doors. So let's use that laboratory to work on these deep tech military technologies, which ultimately will be dual-use technologies and will create long-term spillover effects into civilian application, into real economy. So not always choices have to be made.
I fully agree with Janetta, and this is exactly what we're doing. Deep tech funds and innovation, and Polish drones companies are probably the most experienced. But just, if I may, on the pie, last because as Maria mentioned, the pie gets bigger if we do things together. So if we purchased weapons together, we could save 40 billion euros annually.
Yes.
One sentence on tectonic changes in Germany. You know, GDP weighted, we are spending 250 billion. GDP weighted, if Germany wanted to be on par with Poland, they would have to spend 1.3 trillion euros. So tectonic is not probably there. And last point, because on the Commission, as you mentioned, it was criticized, I just wanted to mention another success of the Polish presidency, except for the stop the clock, namely CBAM. The proposal of the Commission was something that we've negotiated for a long time. And it means radical simplification for 200,000 companies. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I say one sentence?
No, yeah, sorry.
Not really one.
No, really, I can't.
The better the economy works, the less tough the choices will be.
Okay, that was one sentence. Okay, so all of this talk of pies has made me hungry. So thankfully, we have a reception upstairs. That's all the time we have today. In fact, we're way over time, and I apologize to the events team. I'd like to say thank you to all our panelists for the really interesting discussion. And we're just going to take a very quick look at the poll. I don't know if you guys remember, it's been so long, so far back now, but we had a poll. There we go. So this is on the policy compass. Where should it point? Simplification is the clear winner, getting twice as much as the next one, which is supporting the Green Deal objective. So a lot of love for simplification.
Yeah, but still not bad.
Big thanks to our loyal audience who's been very patient, and thank you for joining us. To those on site, please come get some pie upstairs, and thanks to Bayer for making this event possible. We'd love to hear your feedback, so feel free to email us at live@politico.eu. And finally, you can check out the Politico Live website for the latest event lineup.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry.